Imagine you're standing in line at a luxurious bank, surrounded by tailored suits, polished leather shoes, and a silence wrapped in the thin veil of civility. Suddenly, an elderly black man walks in, a worn coat on his shoulders, a faded canvas bag in hand. Someone lets out a quiet laugh. A woman clutches her designer purse a little tighter. A bank employee leans in and whispers, "He must have walked into the wrong place." But then, one sentence, "This bank belongs to me." And the entire room froze, because when the old man knelt down and opened that tattered bag, the truth began to unravel, a truth buried for 50 years, and one that shattered everything those people thought was secure. Stay until the end, because you'll understand why. Justice may come late, but it never disappears. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. Evening settled over Rockview in a quiet, muted grey. On the main boulevard, among a crowd of well-dressed patrons flowing in and out of gleaming glass towers, a thin figure moved slowly across the marble-tiled sidewalk. Samuel Hayes, a black man in his 70s, wore a long, worn-out brown coat, its frayed hem brushing against his ankles. A faded grey knit cap sat loosely on his head. Slung over one shoulder was a battered canvas bag, creased and heavy, as if it carried not just belongings, but decades. He stopped in front of Sterling Crest Bank, the institution hailed as the financial fortress of Rockview's elite. Everything here gleamed, from the polished automatic doors to the bank's emblem, embossed in pure gold against granite walls. As Samuel pushed open the door, a soft chime echoed, like the quiet prelude to something unusual. The customers waiting inside, mostly white, well-tailored, adorned in luxury watches, turned to glance. And then those glances hardened, turned into subtle sneers. A middle-aged woman in a Chanel dress stepped back with a frown, clutching her handbag tighter. A young man adjusted his silk tie and muttered to the nearest teller, "He probably wandered in from the poor side of town. That bag makes me sick." Samuel didn't flinch. He simply walked forward slowly, as if each step across the marble floor marked time that had long been forgotten. From behind the security desk, a pair of cold eyes narrowed. Craig Dawson, a tall, broad white man in uniform, tracked Samuel's every move. His right hand hovered near the holster at his waist. What no one knew was that inside that faded canvas bag were pieces of a truth that Sterling Crest Bank had spent over half a century trying to bury. And Samuel Hayes, the man they assumed was just another homeless old black man, was about to shake the very foundations of Rockview's financial empire. The grand lobby of Sterling Crest Bank was spacious and quiet, filled only with the sounds of keystrokes, receipt printers, and the click of high heels echoing against the polished stone floors. Samuel Hayes came to a stop at the center of the hall, directly beneath the bank's golden phoenix emblem, rising from a pile of ancient coins. It was a symbol of pride this institution had flaunted for decades. He looked around, suspicious stares, smirking lips. Then he stood up straight, his calloused hand tightened around the strap of his faded canvas bag, and his voice rang out, not loud but clear, cutting through the air like a blade. "This bank belongs to me." Silence, 1 second long, then it crashed like a wave. Laughter. It started as a few giggles, then spread like dry grass catching fire. A white man near the ATM burst out laughing. "Did Grandpa wander away from the nursing home?" A young woman in a bank uniform tilted her head and whispered to a colleague, "Probably late-stage Alzheimer's." thinks he's Rockefeller. Phones were lifted. Customers began recording. Laughter, mockery, whispered sarcasm. It all fused into an invisible orchestra. With Samuel at the center, the unwilling soloist of their ridicule, but he didn't flinch, didn't bow his head, didn't show a flicker of shame. His deep, dark eyes scanned the lobby, not pleading, but as if examining a courtroom that once handed down a false verdict. A middle-aged banker passed by and whispered to security, "Craig, handle this quickly. Don't upset the VIPs." Behind them, Craig Dawson, hand already tightening on the holster, locked eyes on the old man. His stare was cold as steel. Still, Samuel stood unmoved. Amid the laughter, the jeers, and the phone cameras pointed at him, he spoke again, this time slower, firmer. "Sterling Crest Bank belongs to me. And today I've come to reclaim what was stolen." The laughter faltered, not because they believed him, but because suddenly they were curious. Who would dare declare ownership in the center of a high-security financial institution looking like that? Who would stand tall beneath the eyes of power and show no fear of being crushed? Someone whispered, "Is he crazy? Or is he?" And just as the question trailed into the air, a large figure began to move from behind the security counter. Craig Dawson, face stone cold, was ready to make his move. The sharp thuds of Craig Dawson's polished black boots echoed across the marble floor, each step a warning drumbeat of an impending crackdown. Craig was the embodiment of brute authority at Sterling Crest Bank. Standing over 6 feet tall, with a tiger tattoo peeking from under the sleeve of his security uniform, he had the look of a man who never smiled, only judged and intimidated. He stopped just a few steps from Samuel. The lobby fell silent. One hand rested casually on the holstered gun at his hip. The other extended like he was shooing away a stray dog. "That's enough, old man. Walk out. Now don't make me get rough." Samuel looked up. No fear, no anger, just a strange, unwavering calm. Craig lowered his voice, now sharp with threat. "This is a private bank, not a charity line. You think saying a few words gives you the right to cause a scene here?" A nearby customer pursed his lips, eyes darting between Craig and Samuel, nervous but with the kind of thrill reserved for watching a public takedown. Samuel stood his ground, did not flinch. He replied, soft but with steel in his voice, "I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here to claim what's mine." Craig snorted, a sneer curled on his lips. "What you've got is a ragged bag, worn-out shoes, and delusions." He stepped in, now face to face with the old man. "If you're not out of here in 3 seconds, I'm calling the cops, and don't blame me when things get physical." Samuel didn't blink. He stared straight at Craig and said slowly, each word etched like a chisel striking stone, "You can threaten me, but you can't threaten the truth." In that moment, something flickered in Craig's eyes. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. A flicker of doubt. There was something in this old man's calm that made it impossible to act rashly. Behind them, the laughter and mockery had died down. The lobby, once buzzing with smug murmurs, now held its breath. Samuel slowly leaned down and set his old canvas bag on the cold marble floor. The room tensed. Craig's hand snapped back to the grip of his holstered weapon, taut as a drawn wire. "I won't say it again," he growled. "Put the bag down slowly. No more games." Samuel simply looked at him, no fear, no pleading. Then he calmly began to untie the string holding the bag closed. The final knot loosened, and Samuel Hayes, with frail, weathered hands that moved with quiet decisiveness, slowly opened the mouth of the bag. No one dared to breathe. A bank clerk dropped her pen. A small child tugged at his mother's sleeve, looking up in confusion. Craig Dawson stood rigid, eyes sharp with suspicion, one hand still gripping his holstered weapon. From the battered canvas bag, Samuel pulled out a large time-worn ledger. The leather cover was cracked, the pages frayed and yellowed with age. Faint, almost faded under the grand crystal lights above, were the words, Sterling Crest Bank, Ledger 1948. A murmur rippled through the lobby like an underground tremor, and then collapsed into something even more unnerving. Silence. The kind of silence born from sheer disbelief. Craig furrowed his brow. His lips moved, but no sound came. Samuel placed the ledger on the glass concierge desk with a thud. A small sound, but one that rang out like a gunshot in the marble hall. He opened to the first page. The ink had blurred slightly with age, but one name remained carved with undeniable clarity. Samuel Hayes, co-founder Sterling Crest Bank, 1948. All eyes locked onto the line. A young banker swallowed hard. An elderly woman fumbled for her glasses and squinted at the page. Samuel said nothing. He turned to the next page. Handwritten notes, early expansion plans, capital contribution records, and the original shareholder list. He stopped at one page, placing a weathered finger under a faded red stamp. Temporary transfer of ownership, under review. Next to it, another name stood out. Thomas Langley, the man who had signed the transfer on Samuel's behalf. From the crowd, someone whispered, "Langley, isn't that the Matthews family's ancestor? The ones who run the bank now?" Craig Dawson froze. His throat tightened. He was used to silencing anger, complaints, threats. But he had never encountered truth with this kind of weight. Samuel looked up. His voice rang out, not loud but chillingly clear. "I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came to prove that this bank was built on my sweat and blood, and I will not be erased from history because of my skin color." A shiver swept through the room. Craig instinctively stepped back. A few customers lowered their heads. No one laughed now. Silence, deep as a canyon. And then, like a blade cutting through fog, a voice echoed from the back. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned. Philip Graves, branch director of Sterling Crest Bank, had just stepped out of his private office. His face was stern, composed. But he had no idea what storm was about to descend on him. Philip Graves stepped out from his office with a look of thinly veiled impatience. Tall, well-groomed, dressed in a charcoal grey suit with a crisp red tie tucked neatly into his vest, he was the living embodiment of Rockview-style success. "What's going on here?" Philip asked, his gaze sweeping across the lobby, now packed with onlookers. And then his eyes locked onto it. The old leather-bound book sitting squarely on the counter beside a quiet black man whose hand still rested on its cover. Philip frowned but kept his voice composed. "I'm sorry, sir. Who are you? And what exactly do you think you're doing here with that relic?" Samuel Hayes didn't answer immediately. He looked straight into Philip's eyes with such calm resolve that it sent a chill crawling down the bank manager's spine. Samuel nodded slowly. "You're the branch manager, aren't you? Good. Then you should be the first to hear my name and understand why I'm here today." He tapped the ledger lightly. "My name is Samuel Hayes. In 1948, I was one of the two founders of Sterling Crest Bank." The entire lobby froze. Customers and staff alike seemed to stop breathing. Craig Dawson gripped his holster tighter. Philip raised his eyebrows, but the smugness in his eyes was already fading. "That's impossible," Philip muttered. "The Matthews family founded this bank in the early—" Samuel cut him off, his voice calm but sharpened to a blade's edge. "Wrong. The Matthews family didn't found anything. They stole it. From me. When I was young, black, and lacked the standing to protect the truth." Philip's face paled. A few customers whispered to one another. Rachel Moore, the youngest bank employee, instinctively covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide in shock. Samuel turned another page in the ledger and held it out to Philip. "This is the original contract. That's my signature. That's my name. Crossed out. And this is the signature of Thomas Langley, the man who used forged documents to transfer every share of ownership to the Matthews family. A betrayal in ink." A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room. Philip took half a step back, his eyes locked onto the blurred but unmistakable handwriting, damning in its clarity. Beneath his feet, a legend was cracking. Samuel spoke again, his voice now hoarse but still unwavering. "I tried to fight back. I brought the documents to every law firm, every courthouse I could find. But in 1948, who would listen to a black man accusing a rich white family of theft? They erased my name. They threw me out of the very institution I helped build. And then they had the audacity to call it Rockview Tradition." Philip looked down, lips pressed into a tight line. He couldn't speak. All that remained was heavy breathing, confused glances, and a truth that slashed through the air like a blade. From the back of the room, an elderly man whispered, "If what he's saying is true, this whole town's been living a lie for 70 years. Samuel looked around slowly. "I'm not here to ask for money. I'm not here for apologies. I just want the truth to be named, and I will not leave until it is." No one moved. Not a single sound broke the air after the old man's final declaration. Samuel Hayes stood motionless for a long moment in the grand lobby of Sterling Crest Bank, letting the silence settle like a moment of mourning for the decades buried in the shadows. Then, slowly, he leaned down and opened the remaining section of his worn canvas bag. Rustle, rustle. The sound was soft as a whisper, but when Samuel pulled out stacks of aged paper currency, the entire bank seemed to be sucked into a whirlwind from the past. One bundle, then another, then a third. Each stack of yellowed bills, fraying lightly at the edges, was placed carefully on the polished wood surface of the counter. They were bound with fragile twine, faded and worn, as if pulled from a wartime vault. The old Sterling Crest Bank logo stood clearly on every bill, a symbol that had been replaced over half a century ago. "These are the first bills ever printed by Sterling Crest Bank," Samuel said slowly, each word landing like a stone in the hearts of those listening. "I've kept them for over 50 years, not because of their value, but because of what they represent." Whispers began to ripple through the room. More customers moved closer, squinting at the bills. Some of the older ones recognized something: the vintage line work, the hand-stamped seal, the cursive signature at the bottom. A woman gasped softly. "My grandfather used to keep one just like this." Rachel Moore, the youngest employee at the bank, stepped forward quietly. She stared at the pile of old money, her gaze unmoving, and then turned to Samuel as if truly seeing him for the first time. Craig Dawson clenched his jaw. His hand still rested on his holster, but this time, the confidence was gone. Samuel pointed to the faded text printed on the bills, almost vanished with time. This line here was once the bank's promise to black citizens. that this would be a place of fairness where dreams could begin. But this very place was the first to trample mine, just because of the color of my skin. The room seemed to choke on that truth. Even the distant hum of the AC felt deafening in the weight of silence. A younger customer whispered to the person next to him, "If those bills are real, then maybe everything he said is real too." Samuel continued, "I didn't keep this money for its material worth. I kept it for a day like today, so I could place it here, on the very table that once denied me, and ask every person in this room." He lifted his head, locking eyes with Philip Graves, then scanned the room with a gaze both heavy and piercing. Have we been living in truth, or in a lie gilded by power? Amid the suspicious stares, Samuel Hayes placed his hand on the worn canvas bag once more. Slowly, deliberately, as if summoning a memory he had carried his entire life, he pulled out another aged object, a dark brown leather ledger. The cover was cracked, the corners peeling, but at its center, one faint line of text still remained. Sterling Crest Bank Ledger, 1948. No one spoke. Philip Graves squinted, stepping forward as if drawn by an invisible force. Craig Dawson furrowed his brow, his eyes tightening with tension, his feet subtly shifting as if calculating his next move. Samuel opened the book. The first page. Beneath the dust of decades, the faded brown ink still read clearly. Founded in 1948, Samuel Hayes and Thomas Langley. 2 handwritten signatures, real ink, real names. Samuel said nothing for a moment. He let everyone look. Then his voice rang out, not loud, but sharp as a blade slicing through layers of polished deception. My name was never written into the official history of Sterling Crest Bank. But this is the truth. I am a founder. I was the one who built this bank with Thomas Langley, the first brick, the first dollar. A gasp escaped from an elderly customer nearby. Philip Graves turned pale. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the name Samuel Hayes in the ledger, a slanted, firm handwriting, impossible to fake. Samuel continued, his voice weighted with pain. Langley and I, we were close friends. But when the bank started to gain value, he secretly conspired with the Matthews family, the same family that runs this bank today, to erase my name, force me to sign forged papers, and disappear me from the board of directors. And why? Because I was a black man. A wave of shock swept through the room. Rachel Moore covered her mouth. Ethan Clark took a step back, his eyes filled with confusion. Samuel placed the ledger firmly on the counter, as if laying down a verdict at the feet of those who had denied him. I stayed silent for 50 years, but today, in this very place, I won't be silent anymore. His eyes swept across the room slowly. No one dared look at him, as if he were just a delusional old man now. There was no laughter, no sarcasm, only the truth, and one overwhelming question hanging in the air like a storm cloud. How much of our history was written by the powerful to bury their sins? The grand lobby of Sterling Crest Bank had fallen completely silent. The leather ledger lay motionless on the counter, like a living witness to a betrayal buried for over half a century. No one dared touch it. No one said a word. Samuel Hayes lifted his head. His aged face, framed by white hair, no longer looked like that of a nameless drifter, but of a man who had been robbed of his life, now rising to reclaim what was once his. He took a deep breath, then spoke. Each word echoing off the marble walls striking the conscience of everyone in the lobby. Thomas Langley and I founded this bank together in 1948. But when Sterling Crest began to make money and earn prestige, Langley changed his tune. He told me, having a black man's name on the bank will hurt our image with the financial elite. Then he handed me a so-called restructuring contract to sign. Samuel paused, his eyes dimmed as if staring into a bitter past still burning in his memory. I wasn't invited to that board meeting. No explanation, no chance to object. The next day, the name Samuel Hayes vanished from every record. I asked, I demanded, I filed lawsuits. But no lawyer dared take my case, because everyone knew the Matthews family was untouchable back then. His eyes burned with a strange fire, a sacred flame that had survived a life scorched by injustice. I was thrown out. No money, no name, no justice, and all of it, because I didn't have white skin. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth to stifle a sob. An old man shook his head, whispering something to his wife. A young employee in the corner stared at Samuel as if seeing a page of history never written. Craig Dawson stood frozen, his face flushed red. His hand still rested on his holster, but he didn't move. As if even he was being nailed in place between truth and blind pride. Philip Graves remained silent. But everyone could see his hand gripping the edge of the counter, his eyes drifting, unsure where to land. Samuel turned and pointed directly at the large black and white photograph hanging on the wall behind the counter. Thomas Langley, founder of Sterling Crest Bank. I don't need him to disappear. I only want the truth to stand beside that photograph, to say that it wasn't just Thomas Langley, but also me, Samuel Hayes. He paused, and so did the room. I once believed justice belonged only to the powerful, but today I stand here, not wealthy, not influential, only holding the truth. And I want to see whether Sterling Crest Bank still has the courage to face the light. The atmosphere inside Sterling Crest Bank remained heavy as stone after Samuel Hayes's public reckoning. All eyes were now fixed on him. A black elder standing in the heart of a glittering world, unarmed, but carrying the weight of history. And then, just as expected, Craig Dawson, the towering security guard, all muscle and intimidation, always ready to crush the powerless, stepped forward. His boots echoed loudly across the marble floor. He grabbed his radio, but instead of calling the police right away, he stepped up to Samuel, leaned in close and hissed through clenched teeth. I've been patient with you long enough, old man. This isn't a soup kitchen. Get out before I drag you out myself. Samuel didn't flinch. He stood tall, his gaze as still as a deep well, not a trace of fear. What are you afraid of, Craig Dawson? He asked, his voice low and steady, ringing like a bell. Afraid of an 80-year-old man with a ledger and a few old bills? Or afraid of the truth? Craig's jaw tightened, his voice rising. I'm afraid of troublemakers like you ruining order. Samuel let out a soft, cutting laugh, his eyes sharp as a blade. That order you cling to is the same one that crushed me 50 years ago. Craig pointed forcefully toward the door. Last warning, walk out or I'll call the cops. And I swear I'll escort you out myself, in handcuffs. The lobby froze, no one spoke, not a single employee moved. The people who had once laughed now held their breath. Everyone could see it. Craig's hand inching closer to the gun at his waist, but Samuel didn't move. He slowly turned to glance around the room, then fixed his gaze back on Craig, and spoke as if delivering his final oath. I was thrown out of the very bank I helped build. I've been punched, kicked, and silenced. But today, I have nothing left to lose. And if I have to leave here in handcuffs, then at the very least, all of you will remember the name Samuel Hayes. His words echoed through the stone walls. Craig's fists clenched, but he still hadn't made a move. Perhaps it was the calm in Samuel's voice that unnerved him most. From across the lobby, Philip Graves and several employees began to exchange looks, their expressions slowly shifting from confusion to unease. And then, from the teller counter, something happened no one expected. Someone stood up. The tension hung in the air like a fraying wire about to snap. Craig Dawson stood frozen, hand hovering dangerously close to his holstered gun, jaw clenched, eyes blazing. Samuel Hayes, old, wiry but standing tall like a monument, had not taken a single step back. And then, a faint scraping sound. From the far end of the room, a young woman rose to her feet, small, shy, often invisible. But in that moment, her eyes shone with the fire of someone who had finally found her voice. Rachel Moore. She was the newest employee at Sterling Crest Bank, just 3 months in. Always quiet, always timid. No one paid her much attention. But now, everyone was watching. Rachel walked slowly toward Samuel. Her hands were trembling, but her feet never stopped. Craig narrowed his eyes. "Moore, get back to your station." She didn't answer. She bent down and gently picked up a yellowed vintage bill that had fallen to the floor, still bearing the old Sterling Crest logo. With great care, she placed it back on the counter in front of Samuel. Then she looked up. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the thick silence like an axe through frozen stone. "I believe you." For a moment, it was like the entire room exhaled at once. Craig was stunned. Philip Graves squinted in disbelief. Everyone looked at one another, not quite sure what they had just witnessed. Samuel simply looked at her. He said nothing, but in his eyes, something flickered. Not pride. Something deeper, gratitude, the kind that waits a lifetime for even one person to believe. Rachel turned and faced Craig Dawson directly. "Sometimes silence is complicity, and if I don't do something today, I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life." Her voice trembled, but her gaze did not. Craig stared at her, stunned that a lowly intern would dare to stand up to him. In the middle of the lobby, in front of everyone. The silence felt like a vacuum. Rachel Moore still stood there, alone, trembling, but brave. The entire bank lobby seemed frozen after her words. "I believe you." Craig Dawson's face turned crimson with rage. He took a step forward, fists clenched, but before he could speak, a voice rang out, young, steady, male. "She's right." Heads turned instantly. Ethan Clark, a bank teller usually known for cracking jokes behind the counter. But now his face was solemn, different. Ethan stepped out from behind his station, walked over to the front counter, and gently picked up another one of the aged banknotes. He laid it beside the one Rachel had placed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," Ethan said, his voice hoarse, "for laughing when you walked in, but I can't pretend anymore." His words were like a stone thrown into still water. The ripple began. Brandon Lee from document processing quietly stood from his desk. He didn't say a word. He simply walked to the front, picked up another yellowed bill from the cold marble floor, and added it to the growing pile of evidence Samuel had brought. Then he stood firm, facing Craig, unafraid. And then, a receptionist, an auditor, a young intern only 2 weeks into his job, One by one, no speeches, no instructions. They left their desks and walked, slowly, deliberately, as if participating in a silent ritual. No words were needed, but every footstep said, "We don't accept lies. We won't let one old man stand against a system, alone." Craig Dawson now stood like a statue. His eyes swept over each familiar face, the same people he thought would remain silent forever. But now, they were standing with a ragged old man. Truth was winning, not through shouting, but through small, unstoppable acts of courage. And at the center of it all, Samuel Hayes stood motionless. He didn't speak. But in his eyes was something that had been lost long ago: faith in people. The atmosphere inside Sterling Crest Bank was taut as a stretched wire. Every eye was now fixed on Craig Dawson, the only one who had yet to move. His face was flushed, fists clenched so tightly they trembled. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The very people who worked under him, from interns to seasoned staff, were now standing beside a ragged old man in worn shoes and a fraying coat. "Have you all lost your minds?" Craig's voice cracked, hissing through clenched teeth. "He's a fraud, a nobody, and you're siding with him?" No one responded, only silence. The kind of silence that makes a man in power realize he has none left. And then Craig did the unthinkable. He drew his gun. A chilling shk sliced through the air, sharp and cold as a blade. The black barrel pointed directly at Samuel Hayes. A collective gasp swept the room. Rachel Moore clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide in horror. Ethan Clark staggered back a step. Brandon Lee started forward instinctively, then froze, fear washing over his face. But Samuel did not move. He stood still, his gaze locked on Craig's, unwavering. "Put the gun down, Craig." A hoarse voice came from behind. It wasn't just anyone. It was Philip Graves, branch manager. Craig spun around, eyes wild. "You too, Philip? You've been fooled by him too. You're siding with him." Philip walked forward slowly, each step heavy as stone, but firm as steel. "If you pull that trigger," Philip said, voice low but commanding, "you'll have to go through me first." The bank held its breath. Craig hesitated, his hand trembled, then steadied, then shook again. The rage, the wounded pride, the collapse of everything he thought was true, all boiled over in his eyes. "You'll regret this, Philip," Craig roared. "We'll all pay for letting some old man's lies destroy everything." But the gun was still pointed at Samuel. One wrong move, one squeeze of a finger, and a life would be lost. In that moment, all of Sterling Crest Bank stood suspended. Between justice and power, sanity and madness, truth and ego, and everything hung on one final word. Craig Dawson held his stance, gun still aimed squarely at Samuel Hayes. The atmosphere inside Sterling Crest Bank had turned to stone. No one dared to move, no one dared to breathe. 1 second, 2, 3. Tension climbed to a boiling point, as if the smallest twitch could spill blood across the marble floor. And then, Philip Graves stepped forward. Slow, steady, unshaken, he didn't shout, he didn't command. He simply walked and positioned himself directly between the gun and the man who carried 50 years of buried truth. A living shield. "Step aside," Craig roared. "I won't say it again." Philip didn't budge. He drew a breath. His eyes never left Craig's. And then his voice rang out, low, clear, sharp as a blade slicing through the fog of lies. "If you're going to shoot today, Craig, then you'll have to shoot me first." A ripple of shock tore through the entire bank lobby. No one had ever seen Philip Graves, known as the quiet, neutral, conflict-avoiding branch manager, stand like this. I've seen the documents. I've read the signatures. I've looked at the ledgers, and what I saw can't be denied. Philip's gaze now sliced clean through Craig's trembling shield of denial. You ask me if I believe Samuel Hayes. I don't just believe him. I believe him more than anyone who's run this bank for the past 50 years. Craig stumbled back half a step. His hand on the gun was visibly shaking. We can't keep building on the foundation of a lie. And if today I have to give up my position, my reputation, to stand on the side of truth, then so be it. A wave surged through every heart in the room. Ethan Clark clenched his fists. Rachel Moore burst into tears. Brandon Lee nodded, tears shimmering in his eyes. Craig looked around. No more approving stares. No wall of power left to hide behind. Only truth. And a branch manager willing to die protecting it. Craig's hands clenched. The gun still hovered in the air, but his eyes began to falter. The confidence was gone, replaced by fear, collapse, and something far worse, emptiness. You're all insane, he muttered, then took a step back. The collapse had begun. Inside the grand lobby of Sterling Crest Bank, the gun had been lowered. But what now rose higher was the truth. Craig Dawson slowly backed away, eyes hollow. He was no longer the unshakable wall of authority. He was just a man, lost, exposed in the blinding light of what was right. Philip Graves turned to face the crowd. He stood in the center of the bank, shoulders square, shirt stained with sweat. But his eyes, no longer afraid, they burned with courage. I am the branch manager of Sterling Crest Bank, he declared. And today, in front of every employee and customer here, I am making one thing absolutely clear. The room held its breath. The documents presented by Mr. Samuel Hayes are entirely authentic. The 1948 ledger, the original banknotes bearing the old Sterling Crest seal, and most importantly, his signature, on the very first page. Some customers shuddered, employees exchanged glances, their skepticism melting into quiet reverence. The man who betrayed him, who signed away his ownership without consent, was Thomas Langley, the very ancestor of the family currently in control of this institution. The air itself seemed to pause. We built an entire financial empire on an outright theft, a calculated crime buried beneath polish and protocol for more than half a century. And we can no longer close our eyes and live within that lie. Rachel Moore wiped away tears. Ethan Clark nodded, lips pressed tight with emotion. I will take all of this documentation to the executive board, and after that to court. If necessary, I will testify before Congress. I don't know how long I'll remain in this position, but I know one thing. I am doing what's right. The first clap rang out, soft but sincere, then the second, the third, and soon the entire lobby, filled with people who had once stood in silence, once harbored doubt, rose to their feet, applauding thunderously. Samuel Hayes said nothing, but his eyes welled with tears, not because he had won, but because finally he no longer had to fight alone. Evening fell over Rockview. The last golden rays of sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Sterling Crest Bank, bathing the grand lobby in amber, a space that just hours earlier had been filled with sneers, ridicule, and the cruel silence of dismissal. Now it was reverence, respect, and a hush full of unspoken gratitude. Samuel Hayes walked slowly toward the exit, still clutching his worn canvas bag. His shoulders were thin yet steady, as if carrying the weight of a reclaimed chapter of history on his back. With every step he took, those who had once stood silent now rose to their feet. Rachel Moore placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head. Ethan Clark removed his bank badge and looked after Samuel, a silent apology in his eyes. Brandon Lee, who once whispered mockery, now stood solemn, his eyes red with emotion. Even Craig Dawson could not meet Samuel's gaze. He simply bowed his head. Silently, Samuel paused at the doorway. He turned back for one final look. The bank lobby was eerily still, but in every pair of eyes was a verdict. A turning point just written into the pages of time. He smiled, a gentle, weary, but victorious smile. "Thank you for letting me tell the truth. Not for me, but for the generations that follow." No one answered with words. Instead, they all bowed, a belated apology, and an unspoken promise that this truth would never again be buried. Samuel Hayes stepped out of the bank. The evening sun lit his wrinkled face, weathered by time. But his eyes sparkled, as if he were walking into the very first day of freedom. Behind him, the doors of Sterling Crest Bank slowly closed. But in Rockview, another door had just opened. The door of justice, of truth, and of a history, finally rewritten by the man they once erased from it. Some truths take a lifetime to be heard. Some wounds don't bleed, but history bleeds silently because of them. And there are people like Samuel Hayes, who need no power, no wealth, just an old canvas bag and unshakable courage to make an entire bank bow its head. Today's story isn't just about a man who was betrayed. It's a wake-up call for every generation. Never underestimate the voice of truth, because one day it will return, and it will reclaim everything. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed for how you look or where you come from, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story, where truth always finds its light. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.